So we're going to start things off by just having a look at how this works, and then we are going to set up a PubNub account, create an app, go ahead and install their SDK, and we're ready to start building this thing. So I'm just going to bring up a terminal. On either side I just have this split so I can very easily work with it, and I'm just going to run this file using PHP like so. So I'm going to do this on both sides, assuming that two people are using this even across the other side of the world. So I'm going to join a particular room, so there's the ability to have multiple rooms in here, and I'm going to go ahead and connect with a username, and that will go ahead and connect me to that room with that particular username. So I can do the same thing on this side. I'm going to join the same room, but I'm going to use a different username. And this also has the ability to check if a user already has a username taken, so it will just ask you to enter a new one. So now what I can do is just start typing away, and it works. And I can do this on the other side as well, and it's very, very quick. This is actually in real time. So just to exit, we just do a Command and C, and we're out. And we can go ahead and connect again if we want. Let's just take a look at the username checking that I just spoke about. So if I just very quickly reconnect as someone, this is actually going to be taken. It just takes a while to get rid of that user. But if I go ahead and connect to as Billy, which we can see over here, then it says username taken, and we can go ahead and choose a different name. So that is pretty much it. But to be able to do all of this, we need a very good service that allows for real-time communication. And for this, we're going to be using PubNub. So what I recommend you do is go ahead and sign up for an account. What I really love about this is that you don't have to enter a card, you don't have to pay for anything to get started testing this out. So go ahead and sign in, and we'll go over and start to create an app. Now the first thing that you'll notice when you sign in is a demo project that's already been created for you. So what we can do is go ahead and click on this, and you can see here we have a demo key set. Essentially all these are just the public or the publish key and the subscribe key that we can use when we download the PHP SDK. Now we're going to be taking a little bit of a look around this later when we start to test out some messages. We can actually come over to this debug console and actually check this out. So once we have these set up. So what we need to do then is download the PHP SDK, and we are of course doing this with Composer. So if you go over to GitHub, I'll leave a link to all of these in the course downloads. You'll find the PubNub PHP SDK. So the package name here is just PubNub/PubNub. So if you come over to your terminal, inside of the directory that you're working in, I've currently cleared this out, so we're starting completely from scratch. You want to run composer, require, and then paste this in, and we'll wait for this to download. Okay, so now that this is done, we need to create our chat file. You can see here that we've got a composer.json file with the PubNub package in there and the version. We have a composer lock file, and we have our auto load that we can go ahead and pull in. So I'm going to create a new file. We only need one file for this entire thing, and I'm just going to call this chat.php. So we need to pull in the PubNub library because we actually need to work with this. So I'm going to use PubNub/PubNub, that's just the namespace to the class, and then we're going to create a new instance of this so we can use it. So we're going to say PubNub, and we are going to create a new PubNub instance, and into this we need to pass in our keys. So let's go over to PubNub and have a look here. So if we click on this, you can see we've got our publish key just here. This is the first argument to this. I'm just going to pull this down so it's a little bit easier. And then we have our subscribe key just here. So let's copy this and paste it into here. And then finally, we have our secret key, which of course you don't want to reveal to anyone. So if you need any more information on the PubNub library, of course, there are lots and lots of helpful things in here for you to look at. We're going to be covering what we need to get this working. But of course, if you want to go use this going forward, then go ahead and read this, and of course, read the official documentation. So now we are pretty much set up so we can subscribe to a channel and start listening to things. And in the next part, we're actually going to pull all of this together. There isn't a lot of code at all. So let's go over and build this chat. So just before we start to pull this together, in the last part, what we didn't do is require in the vendor autoload folder, which means everything's set up here properly, but it just won't be able to find this particular class. So before we get started, I'm just going to do a require on vendor autoload.php, and we're good to go. Now, what I want to start out with is how we actually run this file. Now, we saw in the demo that I did something like chat.php. Now, at the moment, we get a permission denied on this because it's not an executable file. So how do we change this? Well, at least on a Unix-based system, we say chmod +x, and then we choose the name of the file. This will just change the permissions. So now what's going to happen is when I run this again, you can see that it works, but we get a new error. And of course, this is because we're not running this with PHP. Now, it's entirely up to you how you structure this, but you can do that and it works, but I'd prefer to do that. It's a little bit easier. So the way that we get around this is inside of our PHP file, just at the top, we say to this, well, what do we want to run this file with if it's just run on its own? And to do this, we use a hashbang and then the location to PHP. And in my case, it's user local bin PHP. It may be different for you, but this should work. So now I can run chat on its own and it works as normal. Great. Okay, so I'm just going to pull this up a line just so we don't get that space output, and we're ready to start building the rest of the chat app. So before we even do anything, I want to talk about PubNub's subscribe method. And then we're going to take a look at a problem that this is going to cause us. So to subscribe to a particular room, we just say, it's very, very simple, PubNub subscribe, and then we go ahead and give the name of the room. So just to test this out, we're going to use chat. And then we have a callback just in here. And from this, we get a payload, which is the payload whenever a message is pushed to this channel. So now inside of here, we can return either true or false. Now, returning true will basically just allow us to constantly poll for messages, whereas if we return false, it's going to break out of this. Now, it's really important to note at this point that this is a blocking line of code. It will block the execution of whatever we're running. And we can prove this by echoing something just down under here, just say hello. And if we go and run this in the command like so, you can see that just nothing's happening. It's just hanging. So this is blocking the execution of our script. Now there's a way to get around this in PHP, and that's by creating a sub process. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing. If you think about the way a chat application works, you need to allow the user to type at any given point, but you need to be constantly listening for any messages that are sent to that channel, and then you need to output them. So in here, we're going to be outputting messages, and then somewhere up here, we are going to be allowing the user to enter, but we need to do something really odd in PHP to be able to do this. So now that we know that that's the case, let's just test this subscribe here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to do a var dump on the payload that we get back. This will just allow us to see what kind of payload we're working with. Now we can test this from PubNub's website under their debug console. So we're going to do exactly that now. So if we just head over to here and we go under the debug console, what this will allow us to do is go ahead and enter a channel name. In our case, it's chat. And then we can go ahead and add this client. We don't need to worry about the UUID. So here you can see a JSON string. So in here I can say, well, the body of the message is going to be something like hello. And this is what we're going to be pushing to PubNub whenever we write something on the command line. And this will be sent to everyone in that channel. So if I press send, this is sent. And if we go over to the command line and make sure we're running this, so like so, and I hit send, you can see in there, we have that payload, and we can see message, which is part of PubNub's payload structure, and then body, which is ours, and then we have hi. So that's how we're going to be doing it. The user types something into their console, this gets pushed up to PubNub, and then it's sent to all clients, and then we can output the message within there. So pretty standard in the way of chat. So now that we know how we can test it, if you do run into any problems, make sure you use this debug console. It is very, very useful. So we need to start to ask the user for their name and all that kind of stuff, but we want to run this as a sub process that kind of runs in the background and then acts whenever something comes through because it's blocking. So we do this using the PC NTL fork function in PHP. This will fork the currently running process. Now, I'm not going to go through exactly how this works and talk about it in length. It's very complicated, but you can go ahead and read the manual. We're also going to be using this command as well, which you can see in the example just over here. So we're going to be using pretty much this code here. So let's go and start to do this and run this as a sub process so we can be constantly listening for messages without blocking anything. So we say something like PID, the process ID, and we say PCNTL_fork. And then down here, we just basically take that code from the PHP manual. So the first thing we do is check if the PID is -1. And if that's the case, we just want to exit with the 1 status code. That's just a general console error. And otherwise, we can say else if PID, like so. This is our normal process. And then otherwise, this is our child process. So what we can do is take this, put it into here. So we're running this now as a sub process. And in here, this is where we're asking for the user's input, like their name, or not their username, but their message. So now that we have this done, let's start to work on some of the prompts. And we need to ask the user which room they want to connect to and who they want to connect as. So just above all of this, we're going to define out a function called connect as. The reason that we're doing this is if the username is already taken, we need to recall this to be able to prompt the user again for their name. And when we're working in the console, generally we would use something like fwrite. We would give the stream, which is stt out, and then we give the string that we want to output. So we're going to say connect as. And now we need to actually take input from the user. And to do this, we use fgets, and then we use the stream again, but this time we say std in. Now, what we need to do is trim this because it's going to contain line breaks in it since the user presses enter within their keyboard, and we're just returning that. So this function will purely serve as prompting the user for their name and then taking some input and returning that so we can use the return value of the function to set their username. So here what we do then is we say username, and then we just say connect as, and we invoke that. So we can kill the page here just to test this out. So let's echo out username, and we'll see how this works. So over to the terminal, let's come out of this, go back into it, and I'm going to say Alex, and there we go. You can see its output just there. Great, so we've prompted the user for their username, and now we want to prompt them to join a particular room. So we're going to say fwrite, and again, std out, and then we're going to say join room, a colon, and then we're going to do pretty much the same thing as we did here. So we're going to say room equals fgets std in, and then we're just going to trim it because again, we don't want any of them line breaks in there. So the reason we're doing this outside of here is so that we can use them in both this and this block, because we need to remember give the name of the room here, so we can actually replace that now. So we're subscribing to the room that the user chooses. Now, it really doesn't matter what room you subscribe to. You can either subscribe to a room with people in, or if you enter a new name, it will just create a new channel. So it's entirely up to you. Okay, so I'm just going to move this up here a little bit, just so it's a little bit tidier. So we've got the room that they want to join, then we prompt for the username. And now what we want to do is go ahead and just tell the user that they're connected. So we're just going to say fwrite std out, and here we are going to say connected to X as Y, and we'll replace these in a minute. So to do this, we're just going to say username, that's what the user typed, and here the room name that they gave. And what I also want to do is just do some new lines before and after this, just so we have a little bit of spacing. So we are technically connected because we're subscribing to this room, but of course we're not prompting for any input, and of course we're not outputting anything. So let's just review this in the terminal just to see how we're doing. So join room, I'm just going to say chat, and I'm going to connect as Alex, and there we go, connected to Alex as chat. Wrong way around, let's go ahead and just switch these over like so. Great, so now that we have this done, we can start to listen for messages and output them to the page. So under subscribe then, we are going to first of all generate a timestamp that this was sent. So we're going to say timestamp like so, And this is just going to be using the PHP date function. I'm going to say DMY, and then we're going to say hours in 24-hour format, minutes and seconds. And now what we can do is go ahead and write anything that's sent out. So again, we use fwrite, std out, and then the string here is going to be the timestamp in brackets. Then it's going to be the user just in here between greater than and less than sign. And then we're going to have the message just here. So we know that when we send a payload, we get pretty much all of this information through. Now, we don't know what the user's username necessarily is because we don't actually output that yet. We don't actually send this along. So we're going to mock this inside of the PubNub debug console. So we're going to say body hi, and then in here, we're going to have a username that sent this. And for now, we'll just say Alex. So when I send this through, then we have body now and username. And if you need to remind yourself of the payload, simply do a var dump on the payload just in here, and we'll see this. So we can actually do this now just to test it out. So I'm going to join the room chat as me. So you'll notice that this is exited out. So this is, I guess, something that we're going to need to address before this. And to do this, we use the pcntl wait function. And this waits on or returns the status of a forked child. So this is how we're going to be able to do this. So just in here, we want to say pcntl wait, and this gives us back a status just in here if we need to use it. So now when we try and run this again, and I join the room chat as me, you can see that this just hangs. And this is currently now running this that we can then see this payload dumped from. So if we open up our terminal and we come over to PubNub, we can go ahead and send this across, and there we go. So we have an array with message, which, like I said before, is part of their payload structure. Then we have body and we have username. So we have the timestamp in here. We can simply put that into there. And now we need to grab the username and the body. So we can go into message and into username. So in here, we just say payload message username, and then we do the same thing here for the body. So we can just copy this and go ahead and paste it in there with that body in there. Great. So now let's just break out of this and go ahead and run it up again. We'll join chat as me, and we'll go and send this through like so. Come over here, and you can see, as well as the payload, which we haven't gotten rid of yet, we have the timestamp, we have the name, and we have the message. Great. So that is pretty much it for outputting messages. There's a couple of things that we're going to need to do in here in a moment, and that's just because we need to deal with things like new lines and all that kind of thing. For now, though, I'm just going to put a new line on the end of there. Okay, so what we need to do then is start to ask the user for prompt, and what we can then do is publish that message and publish the username to the channel, which will then be output. And this is where we can start to use our other terminal side over here. So if you have a terminal like iTerm, like I'm using, that you can split, this is going to be a lot easier. Otherwise, just put two side by side. So to start to ask for input, then we're just going to say fwrite again, std out, and then in here we are going to put just a greater than sign just to kind of signify that we're going to enter something. And now in here we want to continuously be asking for input. Now if we were to just say message and again use trim on fgets std in, then we are going to just run this once. We don't want to do that. We want to constantly ask for input. So a quick trick to do this is just to say while true and then wrap this like that. Now this will hang, this line here will hang, so this won't go ahead and cause some kind of infinite loop. It will wait for the message as the user types it. So to test this, we can just say echo message. Let's go over to the terminal, run this up, go ahead and join chat. And here you can see I can just constantly type things. Now, at the moment, we don't see another greater than sign. So what I can do is go ahead and put this into here. Let's close this off again, run it up, just say hi, 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 and it works. So now that we have this done, we need to actually publish the message and then we can test. So we don't want to echo it out. we want to use PubNub, but this time to publish and not subscribe. And we choose the room. We already know we have that in a variable. And then we have a payload. So in here, we're going to have a body, which is just going to be the message that the user typed. Let's just pull this down a little bit. And then of course the username, which we already know because the user selected it as part of that session. And that is pretty much it. So before we actually test this out again in the command line, what we really need to think about is what's actually happening here. And is a subprocess still running? Now you might run into trouble if you're doing any var dumps or anything in here. You might actually find that this subprocess is still running and it's not being killed. So I'm using OS X, so I can come over to my activity monitor and I can go ahead and look this up by its PID. And I can go ahead and kill any processes. So if you look for a process called PHP, you will find that you can just kill that if you start to get weird output within your terminal. So just a little tip there that I run into trouble with. So we can now test this out. So I'm going to go ahead and run chat.php. I'm going to connect to any room, it really doesn't matter, and give my username. Over on this side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to join the same room, but with a different username. And now I can start talking. So I'm going to say hi, there we go. And over here, hello, and there we go. So there's a couple of things that we need to tidy up. You've probably noticed that the greater than sign that we created here is kind of not output again just here, and it seems to be a little bit in the way. Now there are loads of ways that you can do this, but the way that I managed to do this was just fiddling around with the order of outputting. Of course, building something like this on the command line isn't a great idea, it's really just for fun, but this is how we would do it. So I've pulled this outside of the while loop. And now what I'm going to do is after I've actually sent my message, I'm going to put this in here again, but I'm going to prepend this with R, which will mean it will overwrite the previous line. And all this will mean is that when we come over here and start this back up again, so let's join chat as Alex, I'm going to say hi. And if we just go and do this in double quotes, because that won't take effect otherwise. So let's cancel, reopen this. Hi, hi, hi. And you can see that we've kept this just in here. So a little bit of fiddling around and you can get this working properly. Okay, so let's start to chat in here and we'll see any problems that we get. So I'm going to cancel this one off. I'm going to join chat again as Billy. And I'm going to go ahead and say hi. And you'll notice here that we have this being output, but with this just here. So what we want to say is if the message isn't from that user that's currently in this session, we want to overwrite the previous line, and that will get rid of this. Now there is one caveat to this, and it's really nothing you can easily get around within the command line, because the command line isn't really built for things like this unless you're building an application in another language. So let's just tidy this up. Now in here, we want to go and use the current username that we're working with, so it's in scope. And in here, I want a little if statement to check when a message comes through, if the username doesn't equal the username that we've set. So we just go ahead and grab this from our payload again. So username, you could even put this in a different variable. Then we want to do an fwrite, again, std out this time. And we just want to do exactly the same thing as we did here. So we want to just say overwrite. So this means that if the message that's come through isn't from the user that's currently connected, it will simply overwrite the line before outputting the message. So now what we'll get is something a little bit better. So let's join chat as Alex. Let's go over here and join chat as Billy. And let's start talking. So hi, and I'll say hi again. How are you? And you can see that what's happening is it's overwriting the previous line and it's moving this down so we can continue typing. Now the one problem I want to address before we go any further, and this is very difficult to figure out and I don't think you can actually do this, is if I'm currently typing, so hi there, and I'm about to write how are you, and someone else writes a message, you can see that that looks as though it's overwritten it. To get around this, you can press Control and R, and what that will do is it will bring the line down so you can continue to write like so, and that will just work as normal and it will just carry on the flow. So this can be a little bit annoying, but again, like I said, the command line in this sense isn't built for these kind of applications, but what we're doing in any way is pretty cool, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so the last thing we want to figure out is if a user connects with the same username, we don't want to let them in because this is going to cause a little bit of trouble. So to get around this, what we can do is we can grab the users that are currently connected to this application. So what we want to do is come over to PubNub because we need to enable something to be able to do this. So if we come over to our demo project just here, come over to our demo key set, we want to enable presence. So if we turn this on and then go ahead and save, this will allow us to detect the people that are currently connected. Now, by default, this will be a UUID. So every client that connects to this room or channel will have a UUID, but we want to push additional information about that user, e.g. their username, because that's what we want to identify users by. So what we do then is just up here, we're going to say PubNub, we are going to set the state in that particular room, and then in here we just give the current user that's connected, like so. And this means that we now identify each user along with their UUID with a username. So what we can now do is somewhere up here, loop through anyone that's currently connected and go ahead and grab that information. So just to test this out, we can say something like here now, PubNub here now. That will give us who's in this room at the moment, like so. And this will just basically give us all of that information. So if we do a var dump on here now, like so, come back over to our terminal, connect to the chat room, maybe, say Alex, and go ahead and do the same here with Billy. You can see here, now I've connected as Billy. We have someone in here already called Alex. And if I disconnect from this and connect again in chat, you can see that I get 2 users just here. So there's no pretty way to do this unless you're using a framework or anything. Obviously we're just messing around here, so we're doing it in one file, but we want to loop through and just check that the username isn't taken. Now the username will just this particular user will hang around for a while, so it won't be if you disconnect, you won't be able to connect with that username again, but really this doesn't matter that much. So we're going to do a for each loop here on here now, and we can look at the payload. We can see that we've got UUIDs, so we want to go through each UUID and we'll identify them as user. And in here then we want to check user, so that's each one of these, state username, so state username, and we want to check if this equals the username that's been given. And in this case we would just want to do a quick fwrite and just say username taken and maybe do a new line. So we can do this in double quotes so it actually takes that into account. And then we want to say username, and you probably guessed, we again invoke the connect as function. That will just block the script because we wait for input, and then it will return that username, and then we will go on. This won't quite work at the moment and we'll see why. Let's go over to here and let's connect. We just fix up that syntax error. Connect as, say, chat, connect as Alex, username taken, try it again, and we're in. So the reason that this doesn't work is that what we're not doing is checking this every time we are prompting for a username. So the way to get around this then is simply to grab this for each loop. We want to go ahead and use this inside of here because whenever we call this, we want to re-invoke that function. And up here, what we want to do is say something like username equals, and then the value of this. Finally, we want to return the username. So like this. So let me just tidy this up a little bit further. We need to take here now up here so we can grab this before. In here, what we want to do is use here now, and let's test this out. So let's go and run this. And of course we need to ask for the room beforehand. So let's do this just up here and we'll go and run it. So I'm going to join the room chat. I'm going to connect as Alex, and I've assigned this as a variable, but it would probably be better in this case to go ahead and just define this as a function, and then we can invoke it just in here like so. So Third time lucky. Let's go and run this. Join the room chat. Make sure we update this here. So connect as, and we will run this again. And I'll go over exactly what we've done here just in case it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to connect username taken, username taken, username taken. I can do this as many times as I want. I've now just mistyped that and I've been connected. So we can do exactly the same thing over here. So let's try and connect into chat as ALX. Doesn't work. If I try as Alex, it doesn't work because we had that one before. Try as Billy, that doesn't work either. So let's go and choose another one and we're in. So it just works as normal. Okay, so just to go over this in case it didn't make sense, we'll run through the whole thing just to clarify everything. So the first thing we're doing is prompting for the room name. Then we're looking up the users that are currently connected to that room. And we are then invoking connect as. What this is doing is it's allowing us to enter a username just here. We store that username. We then go through the list of people that are already in the room. And if we have a taken username, we go ahead and run this again. So it will just keep calling this function over and over again until this isn't true. And then we return that username. What we then do is we go and set the state. So we set the user that's in that room that's currently connected. We go ahead and just tell the user. Then we fork a process here off to another process. So we fork a process to a child process. Here we are constantly asking the user for input because we always want to allow them to enter a message. And then when they do enter a message, we go ahead and publish that message. And then again, we loop again and ask them for another message. In the meantime, in the child process, what we're doing is we're subscribing to PubNub, which is a blocking method. So this will just block the execution. That's why we're forking it off to a child process. We are obviously generating a timestamp, and then we're just outputting any messages that we're getting back from that channel. And then of course we are going ahead and overwriting the previous line if the username is the same, so we don't get the issue that we saw earlier. And that is pretty much it. We've built a chat in PHP on the command line very simply using PubNub. Remember that this is a real-time chat, so I'd recommend going ahead and testing it out with anyone in the world just to see how quick this actually is.